By far, one of my favorite new features of U6 is definitely the spectral atmospheres. There's a lot that can be done with spectral atmospheres, and we're just going to go ahead and take a look right now at how we can play around with these new features and create some pretty cool looking skies. I'm just going to position our camera so that we mostly see the sky, and I'm also going to zoom out just a little, or change our focal length, and that way we can see much more of the sky with more of a wide angle type lens. And I'm using the Good Night default atmosphere located under Spectral Atmospheres, which will be a good starting point. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and actually lift up the sun a bit, so we're a little more in the day. And I'm just going to pick that up. I'm going to set this also to camera so that we can position the sun accordingly without it being all messed up on the axis. So let's take a look at our preview on the side over here. We can see that brightens up the sky quite a bit, and we have a nice little fade over here and some good colors in the sky. So let's take a look at the atmosphere editor, which can be accessed by pushing F4 or going to atmosphere editor up on the top. You'll notice that we have a new spectral model in here, which is the spectral atmosphere model that's just been added. And you'll notice we have a few new tabs and a few things that have disappeared. With the spectral model, we have automatic sun color. So in other words, we can't change the size of the sun, or the color of the sun, but we can still change the size and the corona and other really cool things and really cool parts of it. One of the new tabs is the Sky, Fog, and Haze tab, which is a huge part of the spectral model. It allows us to decay the sky, change the color, the haze, and the fog, and also the glow, intensity, scattering, and just aerial perspective, quality boost, God rays, and volumetric sunlight. And I'm just going to work you through each one of these, and we're just going to customize the sky a little bit, add some clouds to it, which we can do by using the Cloud tab. But I'm going to start out, and we have global radiosity on right now, and I'm going to go ahead and change that just to global illumination, so it renders just a little bit quicker. And we also have our global lighting adjustments, where we can still adjust our light intensity, light balance, and ambient light. And also we can change our ambient light color and light color. Let's go back to the Sky, Fog, and Haze panel here, and I'm going to go ahead and actually make this sky color a little bit darker. So I want to make it a little more of a bit of a blue, a little bit darker blue. And we can see how much that really intensifies that sky, but doesn't quite look right at the horizon. So we're going to use the decay color, which right now is set to this sort of default orange, which actually produces a very nice effect. So if I increase our decay amount, we will notice that it starts to pick up more of that color, and we see it more at the horizon. What we can also do is adjust the altitude of that decay and how high up it affects our scene. Also increase the intensity. And the same goes for our sky, the sky ground density and the sky mean altitude. We can adjust the altitude of this color and the density of this color. So we can of course reduce this down, and which will give us a much more gray effect for the sky. I'm going to turn that up all the way, and I'm also going to turn up our altitude just a tiny little bit more, so we get just a little bit brighter of a scene up there on top. And then we can adjust our decay amount and make that just a little bit more harsh, and then we could even change the color of it if we wanted to. I'm just going to up the altitude, and just to show you exactly what this color is doing, I'm going to change it to something of a red, so we can really see it taking effect and adding a lot of purples into the scene, as we can see. So let's go back to more of sort of that orange color, and this was actually a little bit lighter. And keep in mind that these changes in color, when you're working with 100% levels, especially with the decay amount, you will notice a very, very large change between colors. So if I go to edit this color and just make it a little tiny bit darker, we're going to see a huge change in the scene of the color. And we can see that back and forth through there, and it really does make a difference. So if we move it to the side just a tiny little bit, we're going to see it change a little bit more. So we can see that really down here. So you have to pay attention to exactly how much decay and what color you are using. But the defaults are usually pretty good. But you can of course go in there and do something a little bit more and make your own unique sky. What we can also adjust is the haze color. Right now it's set to sort of a gray. Just to actually show you what the haze looks like, I'm going to change it to a green. And now we can see how that haze is actually affecting the sky. And I change the density and of course the altitude. So all of these have density and altitude amounts that help it and make it a lot easier to actually work with this, knowing that it's pretty much the same tools, but for different effects. See, it's very, very green with that haze now, and we could also change it. Let's just change it to more of a whiter gray, and we'll see the scene really intensify in color. So we could also do this with the fog color, and I'll show you the fog in a red, so that way we can really see it, sort of the opposite of the blue. And right now our density is at 0, so let's go ahead and boost that up to about 57%. And now we can really see that ground density of that fog. It's really red in there. We can also adjust the altitude and raise it up just a little. And now we can see it's much, much higher. Nice gradient fade off, but it's very, very harsh in the center down here. So it's a really cool way of adjusting that. What we also have is aerial perspective. And if we go ahead and bring this down to 1, what we're going to notice is a much harsher horizon. And of course, with these settings right now, it's really not showing up so much. So I'm going to boost that up just a tiny little bit, and we'll take a look. And now let's take a look at the aerial perspective from 1 to 10. And what it usually does is, depending on the glow intensity, I'll increase our glow intensity just a little bit. And we can see that actually was quite a bit. And now if we change the aerial perspective down to 1, the glow is more dispersed. So by increasing the aerial perspective, we actually increase more of a glow effect around the actual sun and closer to the horizon. So that aerial perspective can kind of fix it just a little. As we can see it bring it in. And this probably isn't the best example of it. Let's go ahead and up our scattering, which will overall darken the sky based on the glow. And I'm also going to go into our sun panel and change the size of our corona, so that's not so huge. And I'm going to bring down the size of the sun just a little tiny bit. Let's go back into the sky, fog, and haze, and we'll adjust our aerial perspective. And we can see that tiny little bit of a change. And what it's mimicking mostly is that effect you get when you're up in the air, and the way the sort of haze and fog sort of blends together with the way the sun reacts more closely to the horizon, and you don't have such a sharp horizon. Because if I was to take these amounts down quite a bit, let's get rid of the haze, get rid of the fog, and take a look. And now decrease the aerial perspective. Although we cannot see a huge difference because we can't really see the horizon. Let's go ahead and bring that into view. We can see that really sharp line. We'll change that. And we're going to be deleting the blue down there. And it's really, really difficult to see just because we're zoomed out so much. I'm going to go ahead and actually zoom in right to the horizon. See it a little bit better. Because a lot of these settings really depend on most of the other settings in order to really take effect. So it can be difficult to see some of these features sometimes unless you exactly know what you're looking for. And we can see that changed it actually quite a bit. We'll go ahead and off that again. And you can see that now we can actually see what that is doing. And it's blending together more of the horizon with our sky. We can see that nice blue gradient in there, that nice fade. If we change that down to 1, we're going to see it the same color pretty much all the way throughout, and we're not going to get such of a fade. So that's pretty much what the aerial perspective does, which is pretty nice. We're zoomed out, so it's kind of hard to see. But when you're zoomed in closer, which you probably will be with your scenes, you will see that effect, and it's pretty neat. So we're going to up our haze back and our fog. We also have a quality boost. And then we have God rays and volumetric sunlight. Volumetric sunlight actually turns on volumetrics for our sun, and then we can adjust that depending on some of the settings in here. And now we can see that actual sunlight coming through a little bit better, more intensely, and it'll manipulate objects a lot differently too. God rays is something that only works with certain types of clouds. So let's go in and actually add some clouds. But first I'm going to reset this back to default. And just move our sunlight up so we don't have all of those different changes in there, and it'll be easier to take a look at the clouds. So go back into the atmosphere editor, and let's take a look at the clouds tab. We're going to click add, and now we have two different types of spectral clouds located under clouds. We have cumulus and low clouds. Now they both work on different types of fractal nodes, or one is a fractal node and the other is a noise node. So when you're in the function editor, you'll notice that there are noise nodes and fractal nodes. Well, the cumulus cloud is created by a fractal node, and the low clouds is created by a noise node. And noise node is the only way to get God rays to work, and along with clouds on the bottom, or shadows on the ground from the clouds, which has to do with our shadow density, which also only shows up with low clouds. So let's go ahead and add some low clouds. We can see we have our shadow density in here, and we have all of these shadows on the ground. We can also adjust the volumetric sunlight with this, and we want to turn on God rays while we're at it. And now we can see that it actually darkened up the horizon a lot, but we can see all these rays in here. And I'm going to zoom back into our horizon, because this is more of a horizon effect than it is anything else. You can get it higher in the sky, but it definitely shows up much more in the horizon. So we can see the difference between these God rays. It darkens up the sky a lot more, and we can see these nice rays poking through the clouds. Now in the Cloud tab, we have all these different options. We can adjust the altitude, the height, cover, density, opacity, detail amount, altitude variations, ambient lighting of the clouds, which I'm actually going to turn down right now, so that we get a little bit darker clouds, and they're not so white as they are. And we also can change down the opacity just a little. And then, of course, we can adjust our shadow density on the bottom, which adjusts how dark our shadows are from the clouds. Turn that down a bit, we see they're much lighter shadows. There's a lot we can do with it. And let's go over to Light tab. We can also adjust this. We can adjust our ambient light color, which also adjusts the sky. We turn that to a green, and we can see that the green really affects that sky. So we'll set that kind of back to more of a gray for right now, or kind of a light blue. And let's go back to our Clouds tab, and the first thing we want to do is go into our front view and actually zoom out. And we're going to right mouse click to move the camera and zoom out just a little ways so that we can see this gray bar. And what this gray bar is the cloud layer, because the cloud layers are completely volumetric, which means we can fly up over them, through them, and it'll all look extremely realistic. So if we adjust the altitude, we'll see we have to right mouse click in order for it to refresh. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit more. And we can see by adjusting the altitude, it raises our cloud. And we can adjust the height, so the thickness of all those clouds in that layer. The height, and then the cover, of course, how much of the sky is covered by those clouds. And let's take a look and see how it's looking in here. We'll go ahead and zoom out just a little tiny bit. And of course, that's an extremely bright sky. So I'm going to go ahead and darken that up just in the Light tab, just so we can really see these clouds. Okay, and now it looks like these clouds need to be reduced in cover, because we can see a little bit too much of them. And maybe just a little bit more. Okay, and now we can go up into the sky. I'm going to bring our focal length back just a little, and we're going to go up above the clouds. I'm going to use the side view with our new constrainer handles, and the gizmos, and actually not the sunlight. We're going to grab our camera and just pull it up above the clouds just a tiny little bit, and we can look down, and then we'll see that cloud layer just below us. So we can fly up into the clouds now, which is really, really neat. And then we can go in and actually zoom in, and actually I'm just going to move the camera down into it, and we can actually be inside the clouds then. So we can see all the different clouds up and down, and it's all volumetric. We can fly through all of it. It can take a little bit of time to render if we're going to be doing cloud fly-throughs, but it still looks really, really good with the lower quality resolution. And if we go to just final, we don't need to use some of the higher settings when you're flying through some of these clouds, because they still look pretty good with the lower settings. So render times aren't as huge of a deal as they would normally be. And now we're going to go back into the atmosphere editor, and we're going to add another set of clouds. We're going to add the cumulus now this time, which does not have shadow density and will not affect God rays. And I'm going to bring up our altitude on these new clouds. And they're down here right now, so we're going to bring that up just a little bit higher, and we're going to adjust their height, which we can make very high if we wanted to, and actually have them above the other clouds. And now we can see a whole new cloud layer. And I'm just going to pull up right here. and I'm going to decrease our ambient lighting on those new clouds, just so we can see them a little bit better. Click OK. And now we can see we have the two cloud layers that were in between the cumulus above us, and then of course the low clouds below us. So we have some very, very neat looking cumulus clouds right here, and we can go up into them if we want to, and render from inside the clouds. Provided that we're not actually in a cloud right now, hopefully looking for a little space, because otherwise it can take a little bit longer to render. We'll just go ahead and move us around and see if we can maybe get ourselves out of direct clouds. So now, since we're so high in the atmosphere right now, we can notice that it's very, very dark, because of course the higher you go up, the darker it's going to get, especially with that aerial perspective on. If we turn off the aerial perspective, then you'll notice the clouds or the sky is actually the same color that it would normally be when you're on the ground. So we'll just wait a second for this thumb preview to render, and now we can see that it's just as bright as before. So not only does it adjust the horizon, but it also makes it so that we can go up into the sky so that it looks like space. So we're going to turn that down just a tiny little bit, down to 4, click OK, and we can go and just fly through these clouds now. And I should probably edit the ambient if I'm going to be using these, because they're a little dark in some areas. But overall, the clouds look really, really neat. And if we go back into the atmosphere editor and look, we can see that it has all the same options except shadow density. So we can also adjust the cover and the density, opacity, detail amount, altitude variations. And what we can also do is do cloud animation, which is pretty cool. And this is all, like I said, driven by functions. So if we go into the function editor, let's take a look at our low clouds, edit our material, and then edit function under density production. And we can see that this is created by a noise node. And I'm going to go ahead and close that out, and we'll take a look at our other clouds. I'm going to edit material, and then edit our function under density production. And you'll see that this is created by a fractal node. So when you're building your old clouds, always keep that in mind, because we can also make tons of different changes in our function editor here to actually make specific types of clouds. And we can use any of the provided procedurals that are available. So we could change it to fabric and get some really interesting looking clouds. Go ahead and click OK. And now we can see the preview of these clouds is really quite interesting. So we can do some really neat stuff with it. You can overlay different clouds on top of each other, of course, multiply them together, and just take full advantage of the function editor and all the different things you can do with these clouds.